Good morning, everyone. I'm Andre Lennon, Principal for Civil and Environmental Consultants, and I serve on NCEDA Board of Directors as the 2024-2025 Secretary Treasurer. I'm excited to be your MC today for the Healthy Environment, Healthy Economy webinar. We're happy to have you with us. Before starting the program, I'd like to acknowledge NCEDA's annual sponsors, whose logos you'll see on the screen now. These companies and organizations support every component of NCEDA's expansive mission and our growing body of programs. We thank all these sponsors for their generous support. Webinars that benefit our membership like this one result from their support. Today, we're delving into the intricacies of environmental permitting and its crucial role in economic development. Today's webinar will equip you with the knowledge and strategies needed to navigate these processes effectively. From air quality and erosion control to wetlands, brownfields, and hazardous waste, our presenter will guide you through top permitting considerations, providing practical tips and tricks. Additionally, you'll gain insights into water and wastewater planning and explore the outcomes of the US 421 Infrastructure Concept Plan. Now let's introduce our speaker, David Lambert. David joined DEQ in May 2022 and serves as the department's project liaison, where he works closely with the Department of Commerce and EDP&C. He provides a single point of contact for the large projects to ensure a whole of department approach as companies navigate the permitting process. David previously served as solid waste director for Moore County and as the town manager for the town of Robbins. He holds an MPA from UNC Chapel Hill and his JD from Elon University School of Law, as well as a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Sociology from UNC Greensboro. We're excited to have David join us to delve into the complexities of environmental permitting and how it impacts economic development, providing you with the essential strategies and insight to navigate these critical processes effectively. Thank you for being with us, David. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Andre. I appreciate it. Can everyone hear me okay? All right.
Yes, we got you, David.
Good. I'm going to assume. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, NCEDA, for inviting me to be a part of this. I've enjoyed going to conferences and meeting with so many of you through projects, right? Through projects that are coming to North Carolina, project expansions, and really excited to talk to you about economic development projects that we have and how DEQ interacts with that. So what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we'll go from there. All right. So he's right. I serve as a project liaison. My official title has changed. I'm the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs and Economic Development, but still serve as a liaison between Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, DEQ, and of course, General Assembly, the Governor's Office, and economic developers across North Carolina. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity. I will be covering a few topics that we haven't really talked about, that I haven't talked about a lot before, and then we'll also revisit some topics as well. So last time I was with the EDA, we worked with, we talked about kind of the top 5 environmental topics that economic developers should know. And you see this listed on the fall 2023 discussion. And we're going to refresh a little bit of that, but we're also going to talk a little bit about some the circular economy and what that means and why it's important, and how that affects economic development and business recruitment. Talk a little bit about permitting tips, and then also really diving in kind of some of the current issues and current perceptions and needs around infrastructure and planning on the local level and the state level, and then dive into some specifics on the US 421 regionalization or that concept plan. So again, I'm looking forward to having this conversation. I always like to do a little bit of a overview about what we do in my shop at DEQ. So as a result of some of these very large transformative projects in North Carolina, namely right after Toyota, Secretary Beiser called up and said, hey, we got to manage this. And so Secretary Beiser and Governor Cooper and the General Assembly all allowed me to stay, allowed me to come in and work. And I appreciate them allowing me to have a position. But it was a unique approach to economic development, because you'll hear me say this several times as I interact with folks, and that is a healthy environment and a healthy economy go hand in hand, right? If you don't have clean air, if you don't have clean water, nothing else matters. You're not talking about economic development. And one of the reasons why North Carolina has the secret sauce, we are a place that you can make a good living, and that the North Carolina is livable, right? And so there's a reason why have been to the top 3 state for economic development for the last 5 years, and that we've been number one twice. So, and that is because we work well together. And the goal for these projects is to be a resource, a partner in economic development, and not DEQ to be this obstacle to overcome, or to navigate in some strange way. We want to be able to be proactive, solve problems. And so a lot of what we do, me and my team member, we will do a whole of department approach. We want to make sure that within DEQ, different divisions are talking to one another for these large projects, that the information you share, that we can share internally to make sure that we can create an efficient process. Interagency collaboration, so working with EDP&C and Commerce on some of the recruitment projects, to make sure that as we're talking, we can understand the intricacies of the site, we can understand what's needed, and that we can manage expectations. We can be very clear, we can be direct, because one thing, DEQ will dot every I, we will cross every T, but that doesn't mean you are not going to be very much aware of what those needs are and what the expectations are. And when we are able to communicate effectively, we're going to be able to really move this project along. And that's really, I really see my role is part of it, is being a partner in economic development, in that we are a differentiator between us and other states, that you have DEQ's highest level of Secretary's Office attention on some of these projects. We also have certainly our Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service certainly helps out with many one-off questions and some very introduction projects to some of the smaller projects that are also very, very, very important. Talk a little bit about permit coordination. This is an example of some of the project coordination we do. So on some of the large projects, we get everyone in the room. We got DEQ division. So the permit writers for a specific project are in this virtual room. We bring in commerce folks, local water and wastewater treatment plant operators, and economic developers, planning and zoning folks, utilities, railroads, and their consultants. We're in there, and we track every single permit. On the screen, you can see several iterations of a erosion sedimentation control permit, each different phase, modifications. And then what you don't see is some of the notes, that we can know exactly where we are, when something's submitted, when we can anticipate it being done, and we know whose court the ball is in, right? We can work together and do that. So we want to make sure that we are partners in that. So that's a lot of things we're doing for these larger projects. So one topic, this is the new topic that is certainly very important to the Secretary and very important to North Carolina. And it's one that I haven't talked a lot, but this leads to a solution or an approach to a problem that is coming rapidly, that could threaten economic development opportunities in North Carolina. And so in the spirit of everything that we want to be proactive instead of reactive, so that we can respond appropriately. So I'll talk a little bit about what is the circular economy, and that it is basically, it's recycling. It's working with different waste products and to create something new. Circular economy creates jobs in North Carolina. Circular economy creates and allows economic development to happen. Steel for bridges, that's coming from recycled steel, right? It's coming, we have the infrastructure to make sure that we can have the industries come to North Carolina to expand, and that we can make sure that we have the roads and everything needed to make this work. And the Secretary has actually created a Circular Economy Council, where you've got several businesses, beverage associations, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, different recyclers in the industry, and different Microsoft. They're all part of this council, and we're talking about how we can build this circular economy in North Carolina. And so I'm showing you kind of what this is, and then I'm going to show why it's important in just a moment. But first, I'm going to show you a story map that was created about a product and its path in North Carolina, and then we can talk about why it's important. So I know I'm going to need to share a new screen, and It should be up now. So the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service created this North Carolina recycling loop. And we're going to talk about how a plastic bottle turns into fabric. And it's right here in North Carolina. So we're not sending stuff across states. We're not doing anything like that. I mean, this is right here in North Carolina, an example. And here is in Greensboro. A resident puts an empty PET plastic bottle into their curbside recycling. That requires good education about what goes in, what goes out. That then the city of Greensboro collects that material and sends it to Republic Services Recycling Center. All of this is kind of in Greensboro at this point. And the staff sort that bottle into PET plastic bottles, and sorts them and puts them into a bale. That's then sent to Unify in Rockingham County in Reedsville, where it's chopped into flake. And then in Yadkinville, it goes to Unify's Reprieve Center, and it's melted and turned into fiber. That fiber is turned into yarn that creates product like shirts. So these are your products that come from your North Face, Levi. Those are made right here in North Carolina and contracted in using bottles to make this. And so that's kind of a good example of a circular economy where the trash comes into a resource that's then resold. And I just think plastic bottles to fabric is kind of a cool concept. I'm going to allow you guys to kind of go to this website at some point, play around, take a look at some of these other options as well, and I'll get back to the PowerPoint. But that is kind of an example of it. And why is this important? Well, a lot of that is impact on landfilling. And so when we talk about the landfills in North Carolina are quickly filling up. The average landfill is about 25.6 years. And this MSW is municipal solid waste. So that's your regular trash, if you think of trash, not your leaf and limb or things like that. But your regular trash is about 25.6 years. And we have about 360 cubic yards of MSW of volume left in North Carolina. So why is this important? You can see that we have 12 regional landfills that can take waste from any county. You've got 28 locals. And we are accepting tons of waste. We did 14.4 million tons in 22, 23. And when a landfill closes, where does that go? And I can tell you from my days in solid waste in Moore County, the biggest thing is not disposing of waste and going to a transfer station. That all costs money and impacts rates and fees for customers, but it's that transporting that waste to a facility and the trucks going back and forth and all of those type of opportunity or those type of issues that can really be a concern and very costly. So how much does it cost if a landfill closes and the company then has to ship their waste 6, 7, or 8 counties over? That's very expensive. That affects their costs and it makes us less attractive. And being able to turn a circular economy then allows us to think about how waste diversion, that we don't have to fill up all this space. We can prolong the landfill life by reintroducing this and turning this into a new product and impacting jobs in North Carolina. So it's just something that we want to make sure that we can show that it's a good for business. This isn't just a feel-good, tree-hugging kind of experience that maybe some people might assume. It is good for business. Waste costs money. Waste costs time. And landfills are in the space business. And once you get out of it, that space is gone, what happens? And there's some pretty dramatic implications. And I'll show you an example here. Sampson County, they have about 10 to 12 years left, and they take 15% of the waste for North Carolina. They certainly serve a lot of Eastern North Carolina. What happens to Eastern North Carolina in 10 years? Right? So how do we really invest in these opportunities? You've got the Charlotte Motor Speedway site. They cover a lot as well. They've got about 8 to 10 years, and they cover 8%. So collectively, around 25% of the waste collected in the landfills are near capacity, and we are sitting here, 10 years out. And it takes about 10 years to permit a new landfill. So these are some things that we need to be considerate of and think about opportunities. So this is a problem that's creeping up that a lot of people are talking about, but that we need to be aware of and think about how we can solve it ahead of time. So that's just something I want to put on the radar. The next thing, and I know we're kind of moving on to a few different topics here. The next thing I want to do is talk about environmental permitting tips on pulling out a couple of different examples. And I will say, I know I said that I would look at questions and answers, but on my screen, I can't see any right now. So I'll probably will circle at the end if I'm getting any questions in the meantime. So looking at environmental permitting tips, one of the things that always comes up when I'm working with EDP&C, local economic developers, is, what permits are needed to make the site look attractive? What is needed to move this process along? Because for the economic developers you're going to get a company and they say they need to open up in 2 weeks and they expect you to have everything done. And so we really have to give some reality checks sometimes. But how can we be in the best position? And one of the things that's important is to think about the wetlands and the processes involved. So you have 401, 404 permits. 404 is related for the Army Corps, and 401 is related to North Carolina's wetland determinations. And we generally defer to the Corps for all things of whether or not it applies to the Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. So there's two things that I just want to highlight that come here. And so I'm here that there's a constant echo. I don't know how to fix that. So I do see questions now, they popped up. But I will say that the jurisdictional determinations is something that's really important that can be done proactively before a company even comes. In fact, we encourage it. If you've got a lot of land, go ahead and see if you can get an AJD, which is an approved jurisdictional determination, and do it for every bit of the property that you think is going to be conveyed, and have that online. They last about 5 years, so they do expire. But if you get that done, when a company comes, that's going to be so easy to move to the next spot. You can talk about specifics on timeline of what they can do with the erosion sedimentation control permit, how they can clear the land and what they can or can't do, where the buildings will be, could be placed, and you have an approved land document that you can make land use decisions on. Without that, you're going to have to take a lot of time to go do that analysis, let the Corps look at it. And right now, there is a big delay in the AJDs being approved at the Corps because of all the law changes that have occurred in court case and course and case law regarding wetlands. The Corps is getting concurrence with EPA to make sure that they are approving the right thing and they're working together on that. Those are taking time. And there's been several instances across North Carolina where this has come up. We need to wait for it. An alternative is to identify the wetlands on the site and take a preliminary jurisdiction determination, and you would just consider them all to be jurisdictional. There could be a business decision made on, well, there's not a lot of wetlands. We know with a PJD, you're going to have to count them all in mitigation, whereas an AJD, some would not. It's just very important that you can make a business decision and determine, do we save time and pay a little bit more money to move things along, or do we want to do it and make sure that we have a lot of impact when we're looking at economic development? So a couple of different options. So once you get the JD, you then can apply for the 401, 404. A lot of local economic developers will work with a company to or a consultant to do this ahead of time before a business even looks at it. Sometimes businesses will do their own if it's not done already. If there's a long lead time, that might be a good approach. But if you want to be prepared, and as we're building a lot of sites, and EDP&C is working on select site programs, as we're doing all these opportunities and really kind of increase the product in North Carolina, it's going to be competitive. And so who's ready first? So we encourage the JD conversation, and the Corps does as well when they're not on the gun of someone calling them, want to make sure something's done very quickly, whenever they can just get it done right and be better for everyone. There is one thing I want to mention as well, is okay, why is it? It's not progressing. Okay, there we go. Wetland 4144. I have some subliminal messages here, and I'm saying it over and over and over again. Please do not do a conceptual 401, 404 plan. This is one where you think, hey, this is the type of industry that might come to this location. This is the type of industry, we can put map out what we think that building is going to look like, and we can see where see that wetlands and all that sort of stuff. And then we think, okay, well, the company comes, whatever company it is, we'll just modify it. And that's got to be faster, right? It's not. In fact, I would say in practice, a lot of times these modifications are not shorter. In fact, there's been a few instances where they've actually prolonged and complicated the process because they've got to wrap up one concept plan that's not serving anyone and then actually redo it again for what's been presented and proposed in reality. And so there's a couple of different reasons for this, is that a modification is still often starting from zero because the environmental assessment is very specific to that business. Where is that specific wall and building going to go? What is being created? What type of utilities and what volume of utilities are coming to the site? Why are we justifying, phase one, phase two? There's all these type of questions that come in. And then we have a conceptual plan. It often, especially if it's not completed all the way, it can really slow down that process. And so, and on the selfish side from DEQ, we're working on projects that don't exist. And we want to make sure that we're working on projects that have a chance of actually happening so that we can make sure all permits for everyone go faster, right? We can have better review times. But in all actuality, it just means there's double work, there's more time and you're wasting time on a concept plan. The best thing from DEQ's perspective, from an environmental point, is to get those AJDs and JDs and have them ready in hand and be ready to move on when a company comes as soon as possible. And if you're working with DEQ, we set up meetings with the Corps and our 401 group, and we want to, that's one of the very first things we want to be able to do. And then we can also give examples of what you can or can't do before you have a permit. And we can give you a verification, something in writing that says, based on the statute, you can go ahead and do this, this, and this, and then you have that kind of security. And that's very important as well. Timing is always a factor with wetlands, and for a number of different reasons. It could be, does the Corps consider this a single and complete project where the water and the wastewater and the electrical and the DOT work and the project all has to be completed together under a single application? Well, then you need to make sure at that point from local economic developers, we need to make sure, is there money? Do we have plans? Do we have everything in place of getting water or wastewater to that site? What about the other things involved? So that's just very important as well. And then whether it's an individual or nationwide, and that really comes up with a lot of mega sites. And so one thing I would mention, it's been a general trend or practice, certainly not a rule. But from what I've seen is often if there's a parcel of a mega site, the first one will be a nationwide, but you can expect the second, third, or fourth companies that might come to that might likely be considered an individual. So which impacts timelines. So when we're talking to companies, we want to make sure that we have that in the back of our minds before we overcommit and underdeliver. And so there's a couple of things we just wanted to highlight for you guys. On the air quality side is one thing I would just really want to point out is that the level of air permitting needing can impact the construction timeline. So generally, there's a review especially for minor and major, like Title V permits, from 90 days for a full and complete application. PSD, which is a federal standard, which is the prevention of significant deterioration, is 9 months. And that's modeling, that's a federal standard. And the good news is if it's PSD across the United States, they're going to run into those same rules. There are very important rules to consider that if they start in phase one and phase two, they might be moving into a PSD category. There's got to be a significant amount of time in between your Title V or your minor before you get to PSD to avoid kind of issues with the feds regarding circumvention of PSD rules. So we want to walk through that and have a really clear understanding. And this kind of goes as well. We know that there's a lot of confidentiality and questions that can come up in business recruitment and sometimes with just businesses in general. One thing that unique about my role is I'm not regulatory. I work for a regulatory agency, but let's have some of these hypothetical questions. We don't need to necessarily send a lot of documents that can become public records under certain situations to some regulatory staff. We can have different conversations. I can be a conduit to have some of those conversations so we can get answers. But the idea is that we want to work together and have clear expectations of what's needed. But one thing that's very important that people forget, and there's been some changes in this and everything went back again, but with Title V and PSD, there can be no construction of a permanent nature, that's footings, foundations, on any portion of that project that's being built that is related to the manufacturing process. And that's just kind of my language associated. There's definitely, there's statutes and we can look at that specifically, but you need to have your permit in hand before you can do some of that preliminary work. Generally, you can do erosion sedimentation control. You can do some things. You have some buildings, for example, that are just offices or parking lots that can start without that. But if it's any part of the process, and it's pretty broadly interpreted there, you would need to have a permit in hand. So it's very important that people understand that from the beginning when you're planning out your projects. And what I want to be able to do is, we know that sometimes, if there's questions that come up, and let DEQ be proactive, and we can help deliver some of these messages, and have your support as we have a conversation there. But we understand that sometimes, if you're not in air quality all the time, if you're not looking at this and you're delivering this message, it can be difficult on the local level to kind of to do that. So we're happy to provide assistance and help deliver messaging as well, to be a team in this, to make sure that we all get things well. I do say, when it comes to permitting, and really in all permits, submit the best application that can be done. I was not air permitting, but I give this example all the time, is we are pretty regularly for a while getting erosion sedimentation control plans where water was flowing uphill without a pump, stamped and submitted, and then we review it, and then we see it on day 29, and we send it back, and then that's further delay. And so we need to make sure that, when air quality in particular, that the clock starts once the application is deemed, technically complete. We do have a lot of pre-submission meetings, and we want it to be as good as possible when it comes in, so we can help coordinate that as well. But it's just very important that the application be good, and that we can take the time on the front end to answer questions. Because if you take 5 or 7 days or whatever to make sure that the application is really ready to review, you'll save at least 30 on the back end by the time we see the issue, detail what the issue is, send it back to you, and then we're going to have a response. Even if you turn it around immediately, it's got to get back to us. And so those are some things that we just want to highlight. Now I want to talk a little bit about infrastructure plan and the US 421 regionalization study. Is a little bit of a refresher, and I know I'm going fast covering a lot of topics, but we've got a we could probably do a whole seminar on each one of these, and wouldn't that be riveting? But we want to kind of talk through some of these options, and this is a refresher of a little bit of what we talked about in the fall, if you were at the fantastic EDA conference that Liz and Torsha put together last fall. But one of the things when it comes to water quantity, a lot of times economic developers will get a question, oh, I'm not a high water user, or it's just 500,000 gallons or 1,000,000 gallons. And it's not the only question to ask. A lot of times that's the only information that people want to give. But we do know that there can be issues of getting large quantities. We are getting asked regularly about semiconductor plants who might need, at one point, I think there was a request for 30 million gallons a day. That's 30 million gallons a day. That's incredible. And then there's other opportunities where, say 4 or 5 million gallons, but then that can change. I think it's very important for the people, the economic developers and the people running the utilities to be in really good communication, to understand what's possible and what's needed at certain points. And I will say it goes into the next point of the quality of that wastewater, for example, can impact the quantity. And we'll get into some details about that, but it's just very important that when the company comes in and they're saying, hey, we need 4 million gallons a day. And then all of a sudden, right before you announce, they say, we need 10 million gallons a day. Well, that's a big deal. And the plant may not be able to handle it. And that happens way more often than we want to believe or hope that it would. But there's also some elements of knowing when you need it and the ramp up schedule, and being very intentional of understanding by this year we need this much, this much, this much by sequentially. And I know that sounds simple, but it's very important. But when it comes to quality, I just want to make the example as well that that someone's wastewater upstream will become drinking water later. We're pulling the same water and discharging the water into the same streams, right? And so it's just very important that both of them affect the water quality, and wastewater treatment affects water quality, and also wastewater treatment upstream and how good that is can affect what's possible downstream. And that can affect what type of industries come downstream. That can affect aquatic life, recreational lakes. That can affect a lot of things that impact quality of life. And you can have an industry where no one wants to live around, or you can work together and make sure that we can treat things well. So that's going to lead me into the US 421 infrastructure study. And so this was a Session Law 2023-134 did direct DEQ to address and to create a concept plan or to talk about regionalization opportunities to address some of the needs. I led this project. It was a public-private partnership with Hazen and Sawyer bid for it. And then there was several other folks that subcontracted with them who are working in this region as well. And the task was, do we have enough infrastructure to meet the economic development needs in the region? And the answer was no. So do we just leave it there, right? We could answer that question, and we have the data to support some of that. But part of what we wanted to do is create a concept plan of, well, how could we do this? How can we not just identify a problem, but let's solve a problem? And so what we did, and part of this was taking data from NC Commerce, taking data from the Economic Development Partnership in North Carolina, and looking at their projected utility needs for the certain businesses that are coming to North Carolina, looking at their studies for select sites and the types of their baselines for water and wastewater usage and consumption for certain industries. Well, we want to make sure that that our studies can talk to one another. So we used some of the same data. We used the modeling from Commerce for some of these large economic transformative projects in the 7-county region that was identified in the study. And we want to make sure that it's very relevant, that we are using the same scale, using the same measures, and working together on this. And I will say that I think that what we wanted to do, and we realized that there are several engineering studies that are sitting on a shelf that will not make it through the General Assembly, will not make it through local, through the political structures that we have. And there are some political ideas and that are not operational, that won't give the most bang for your buck. And I would imagine if engineers, political scientists, other government leaders, environmentalists, all these different entities were to create their own study, you're going to have very different answers, and the problem would probably not be solved very well. It would you'd have blind spots. What we wanted to be able to do, and is to kind of take all of these concepts together to have a plan that's based in data, but also is practically achievable, taking account of what's already being done, what already exists, what problems exist in the streams now, environmental concerns, the condition of plants, and then of wastewater treatment plants and water plants, and then be able to build up an understanding of what's possible, what regulations are coming down, what we know that EPA is not going to allow us to do. And so we can create a plan that is based on bad assumptions. It doesn't help anyone. And so we worked on this plan, and we kind of accounted for all of those type of things and presented some options. And some of the things we talk about, like significant challenges in this Upper Cape Fear region, it was largely the Upper Cape Fear region or the river basin where this study was conducted. And I would say also that this study could probably be replicated in several areas across the state. And we do know that there's certain counties and entities that are just outside of this 7-county region that could and maybe should have been included in this study. We operated within the confounds of what was put in the legislation, but if there was a solution externally that could provide an opportunity in the scope of work within that region, we talked about it, but we did not look outside of that study region to solve problems. So there's always things that can move and change, but I think this is it talks about some of the issues pretty cohesively. And there will be a link at the end if you wanted to see the full 288-page study. It's great. It's riveting. You will enjoy it, every bit of it, in your morning coffee when you read it tomorrow morning. But impairments within the Upper Cape Fear River Basin, there's phosphorus, nitrogen issues, underfunded utilities in the area. There's large systems who's just been struggling to keep up with the demand. The types of industries coming in particular areas can be problematic for certain types of wastewater treatment plants. There's compliance issues, there's moratoriums, there's issues, there's you know, I&I, infiltration into water, water infiltration into wastewater lines to eat up capacity. You have a million gallon, and I'll look at an example in Robbins. I think we had 1.5 million gallon capacity in our wastewater treatment plant, and we used about 200,000 gallons a day. When it rained, a normal rain, we might be having 1 million gallons a day at one point. Now there's been a lot of work to help address some of that with maybe even some people on the call whenever they've contracted with them. But that's kind of an example. You may have the infrastructure, but if it's not maintained, if you don't have the customer base, there's a lot of issues. So we looked at economies of scale, looked at all these different options as well. And we also know that it's difficult to work with people, right? Sometimes our neighbors and towns, everyone can be pretty possessive over their destiny, over what they're doing in decision making. But we don't know the willingness of communities to work together to solve a problem. And it's very complex, and there's lots of things that come in with this. But it's one of those things where it's very important to at least have that conversation. And I would submit, after looking at the study, it's very important for people to understand what their neighbor, next door neighbor or the town next door to them is doing. But it is also important to understand what the town 3 or 4 counties over is doing. Because if they eat up all the nutrients, then there could be a problem, and you wouldn't have solutions for your area. So we're getting to a point, and there's areas right now that are sandwiched between mega sites, different entities throughout this region in particular, just this what we've highlighted, that would, if a company wanted to come tomorrow, the answer is that it's not possible. The only way some of this would be possible would be through some larger regional efforts where you're sharing nutrients, or you're able to have better treatment and take something offline or connect pipe. There's a lot of things involved in this. So lots of things to consider. I'll talk a little bit about the methodology. I mentioned it a little earlier, so I'll speed through this a little bit. But the idea was, when we have a company come and we think about what their direct jobs are, well, we need to make sure that we're accounting for the direct jobs, but we need to account for the indirect jobs that are going to be coming, the suppliers, the induced jobs, the McDonald's and the Starbucks that will open up, and the grocery stores. And all of those need water and wastewater. We also need place for residential needs as well, and where are they going to go. So we took the average of kind of looking with the EDP and study and projected some of this out. And I'll just give an example of Wolfspeed. We did 7 in the study. We did 7 entities across the region: Toyota, VinFast, Wolfspeed, Amgen, Fujifilm, and I know I'm missing another one, but we also talked about Novo Nordisk and things like that throughout this region as well. But this is just an example. And direct jobs could be 182 direct jobs would go within that 7-county region. But a total, when you calculate the indirect and induced, that's 6,475. So we know that those anticipated jobs in the area, we're going to need to make sure that we understand what types of jobs they're going to be. Are they going to be suppliers? Are they going to, if you have an automobile manufacturer, you're likely going to have a carpet manufacturer close by. There's all these type of things to consider. And so what type of waste would they need, and the amount of quantity they need? Then we also looked at residential, where are these people going to live? So we took the same data, and we used a lot of this from Commerce's modeling whenever they modeled the projections for incentives and things, is look at, while there's 1,802 direct new jobs coming for this project, 829 are likely going to be new direct job resident employees. So these are not people who are already living around in the region or living around Siler City. These are people moving out of the 7-county region into the region to work at this plant. That's going to be 829 people. Where are they going to live, right? And then we calculate that out for induced and indirect employees as well. And these are new residents that are coming in. And we kind of map out, you can see some of the, Boom Supersonic up here on the number 3. Toyota number 2, you got Amgen, Fuji 4 and 6. These are kind of examples of where they're going to live, and we projected that out with driving times. And so we need to make sure we have water where it's needed, where it's going to serve that demand. And this is some of the overview of what we looked at, is that there are in each county in different kind of regions that we divided it up in. This was not like a one size fits all where there could be a regional solution for the entire region. This was kind of, there's several mini regional solutions that together can help solve a problem. And we're seeing that they're significant. I mean, looking at the triad, Guilford and Randolph County, I mean, they need 32.79 million gallons of water a day, an average demand, by 2050. That's significant. And they are already the highest water users in the area, just with the businesses and their population and in the study area. You can also see on the wastewater side, which it's harder to solve the wastewater problem than the water, but they are all absolutely related. You can't solve one without the other. That's looking at, sticking with the triad again, that's 30.82. That is a lot. And when you look at water demand, on the left, the chart on the left-hand side, you've got to be able to account for the water that's needed on the hottest day, July 4th, everyone's outside. You got to account for the full-on demand that's needed for the industries and for the residential. And so you see that's at 41.76. So there's a lot of opportunities that we need to do. Do we have this capacity? No. How do we get there? So there's some options that we talk about in there, but this just shows just region-wide in this area, we need about 122 million gallons a day by 2050, more than we have now. Wastewater, we need 103.5. And the total for this, we kind of, did high level numbers, rough order of magnitude, is a whopping $10.1 billion. That's a lot. The question that we also wrestle with is, what's the cost of not doing it? What's the cost to GDP? What are we saying no to? What is the cost of having aging infrastructure without the utility users to pay for it? And I think there's some discussion with the General Assembly. They've not put any money towards this yet. We're having a lot of conversation with the legislators, but the idea is that there could be money put inside from state and federal sources for this, but I would absolutely not expect that there would not be some skin in the game from local utilities and fund balances and stuff to solve the problem, and working together and creating structures to make this work. We have an option. We don't have to do this. We could just say, we don't have some options for economic development in certain areas. But if we want to make the most bang for our buck, we'd have to address some of these issues. This is an example of some of the maps, and I feel like I'm getting close to time, but this is kind of the Chatham and Lee County options. You're looking at the area, the solid lines are proposed water lines, and the dotted lines are existing. We see there's a lot of opportunities here to expand wastewater water treatment plants, to pipe things in from other areas and counties, to move things around, to, all these options are possibilities based on the data we have now. Nothing here should be considered as a wink, wink, nod, nod from DEQ that this is permittable. We have to go through that process in the data, but based on the assumptions and the data and what we have currently, DEQ and the consultants, we recommend that these options be explored. If you deviate from this, you can certainly do that, but have the data to support it. And so this kind of examples of water opportunities, this is wastewater opportunities, and what could be expanded, what can, right now, Siler City, for example, is expanded from 4 to 6. Well, they talk about, could there be an expansion to 8? Could there be some other opportunities about a new wastewater treatment plant? If they're going to open up a wastewater treatment plant, how do they get the capacity or the nutrients needed to make that work? Because we are kind of holding the load on those nutrients due to some of those impairments from EPA, as directed by EPA. So there's several options and things involved here. We're probably getting time to question and answer period, but I wanted to, this is my my information, and if you wanted to scan for the full, riveting report, it's amazing, it's great, this US 421 study, scan it and take a look at that. Happy to answer any questions. I know I sped through a lot, but hopefully we covered a lot in at least a non-tedious way. So, Andre?
Well, that was great, David. I think a lot of great information. I did see we did have a question come in, and not sure if you'll be able to answer this one if we need to follow up, but here I'll read it. Is there a ballpark cost of getting an AJD per 100 acres? Um, or maybe up to a 500 acres? You know, are y'all getting any kind of ballpark estimates in your department for that?
I don't have any information on that. I think that's
Yeah,
probably best suited because it's different regions, different states, and
right.
different consultants, different things going on. I would recommend that would be a question to get some quotes from a consultant who deals
Yeah.
in it. And it can depend on how much is there, the types of
Right.
soils. So there's just several factors there that I would recommend working with a consultant who will ultimately help build that application for you anyways, hopefully.
Mhm.
Um, so there's my answer for that.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I didn't want to be self-serving and say someone like us could do that for them, but yeah, well, I'm sure there's some local practitioner, or I'm sorry, local consultants that can assist our practitioners with that. We did have another question pop in while we were talking here, so let's see. Says David, thank you for your time. Do you have any information to share regarding potential financial support, whether state or federal, to support local utilities meeting PFA's mandates? Also, shout out to the 421 study. It's fascinating and a little scary.
Gotcha. So looking at, there are some state fundings. I can certainly, what I can do is regarding, I guess when you're looking at PFAS and those type of items, there are some questions. There are some funds that North Carolina is using to help assist folks in that area. In fact, I know Brantley Craft. I know that you are working in the Forsyth, Winston-Salem. I'm sorry, High Point, and you have some experience in Randolph as well. You know, just recently there was some well contamination in Farmer Elementary, and so using some of the state funds to address some of those needs to get, there was, instead of it being 4 or 5 parts per trillion, it was like 1,000 parts per trillion. And so DEQ, governor's office, and legislators worked together to make sure that we could get some answers for them and get funding in place for them to open up school. Certainly, there's other fundings available for public water systems as well. We do know that we've been talking about PFAS for a while, and and to be clear, there's been a lot of conversations about that. Drinking water standards is what's put into the standard from the EPA. They put those standards in. It's been projected for a while, and there's a timeline for compliance. We do think that's important that, even look at economies of scale, some of these really small plants, that's another opportunity. Are we going to be able to treat this to the way we need to? And there could be some regional opportunities to help offset that cost for everyone. But we do know what we strongly encourage is that when it comes to PFAS, to addressing we need to address that at the source of contamination, because it's a whole lot more expensive to clean up things once it's already put out there. I mean, and our friends in Wilmington know that very well. Our friends in Fayetteville know that very well. Have had a lot of concerns in that. So we want to be able to work with you on that. If there's any questions that come up, and also as we work with businesses, we're talking about ways to take some PFAS out of that process. But one, it's important to note, and I want to take the point because the secretary has talked a lot about this, the life cycle of PFAS as well. I mean, it's not just in water, and that's the only drinking water. It's discharged in the wastewater, and we know if we don't address the quality of our wastewater discharge, it's going to cost the community downstream a whole lot more to get in that drinking water standard. So DEQ is working to make sure that we follow EPA's mandates and make sure that we're doing everything that we need to do. But at the same time, it's important to know that PFAS from the industry, that we work and we can mitigate some of those issues, that it goes through the smokestacks, goes into the air, rains down, gets in groundwater. That's kind of how it happens all the way around, gets in surface water, and then you create these issues all throughout North Carolina. So, and across the United States. So yes, there's funding. I can get some, if you go to, there's a funding, did a landing page for funding options at DEQ on our website. I will give some specifics after the meeting if Liz will be able to share those, or to you directly, Brantley. But there should be some resources on the website searching that out. It was a long answer to that question.
That's great. No, that's great. We've got another question came in here. So let's see, do you have any comments regarding your involvement with the region, such as the one you posted around Randolph County, Cape Fear Basin, with respect to motions to permit interbasin transfer of water resources, including water and sewer?
Very complicated subject.
Yeah,
Very important. There's been several rules that's been proposed in the General Assembly and about how to address some of this. And the truth is, it depends on where you are and how and the where you whether you're upset about it or whether you're happy about it or whether you need it or whether you don't want it. If you're downstream and you're taking water out, you're diluting, you're taking water away, you're kind of diluting or taking rid of some of the dilution, and you have harder wastewater to treat, or that turns into drinking water, and you have other problems, right? So there's a lot of issues of what goes on here. When we did this study, we did not limit ourselves to necessarily current standards of what the IBTs could be. We understand that there would be some approaches, there could be some evaluations, but I have to look at it as on the whole. It is difficult to change some of these rules because generally you're going to have legislators going to disagree depending on where you are. I would say this, and there's a couple of instances, and I can think of, I'll use the example of Moore County, and it's because I'm familiar with it. There's 3 basins in Moore County. And the question is, people want to get water from one. Well, one option to address that is regionalization. If you're taking water from one region and sending it somewhere else, take that wastewater and send it back. You don't need an IBT. There's other options to kind of look at that, and it can be more expensive. It can be options, but also what other problems are you solving? If we define things just by the cheapest option, or we're not necessarily looking at things from the greatest value. And so it's very important to really reconcile, are we looking at value to solve 4 or 5 problems, or are we just looking at the cost of what's the cheapest way to get away from it? And so, other options of regional systems, you're going to have better fire rating insurance. You're going to have other options in rural areas. You're going to get people connected to clean water that might have been contaminated, or maybe even have development in less dense areas. We need more houses, but we can't have these. We want to have really good treatment of wastewater systems and water in these areas. So connecting that is important. There's several issues to address if we look at it holistically. So, I mean, that would be my main comment, is that we did not limit ourselves to just what currently exists, but we also recognize that this is a very complicated issue. And if we're going to take water away or bring water to, there's going to have to be an offset somewhere that makes it that we're not harming other folks at the same time.
all right. Thanks for that, David. I think that looks like the last question. So I think we can close that out. So thanks again for sharing your insights, experience, and advice today. Before we go, I'd like to remind you of our upcoming events. Join us for our Charlotte area luncheon in Charlotte on September 17th, and mark your calendars for our highly anticipated 2024 Fall Conference, set to take place October 21st through the 22nd in Asheville. Conference registration will open next week. More details can be found on our bi-weekly e-newsletter or on our NCEDA website. Thanks again for being with us today. Have a great day, everyone.